Hello, everyone, and welcome to Women Against Gun Violence Short Takes. From start to finish in 15 minutes. I'm Jode Mann, a member of the Board of Directors of Women Against Gun Violence, and your host for today. I have with me Nurjahan Boulden, who I'm very excited to speak with. She's a gun violence survivor who has taken her circumstance and put it into action. Hi, Nurjahan. Nice to see you.
So good to see you. Thank you for having me today.
Oh my gosh, my pleasure. A lot of people don't know your story. Would you share it with us?
Absolutely. So when I was a junior going into my senior year of college, I, like most college students, was trying to figure out what to do when I grew up. And dance was my biggest passion. I taught dance on campus. And I also loved traveling. And on one of my little adventures, I was going to Toronto, Canada, actually, to go to a wedding. I went out dancing that night, and there was a random shooting. I was shot in the leg with an assault rifle, and the man next to me was killed. Another man was shot in the foot. And when I got back about a week or so later, after time in the hospital and then being able to travel, I went back to my senior year of college, even though, doctors discouraged me from going back right away. I wanted to be the person who refused to let anything keep me down. So I went back to my senior year of college. I was rolling around in a wheelchair, and I wanted to be able to dance afterwards, but I ended up getting surgery right after graduation, and I stayed local. I struggled emotionally and physically for almost a decade after my shooting. One of the biggest things that I dealt with was not being able to pursue those dreams of being a dancer. And I also always felt like everybody expected me to just get over it in that moment and kind of buck up. And so I did my best to just push everything down, hold it in, and I never talked about what happened that night. It wasn't until one night I went to an event that was hosted by my college, by Pitzer College, and there was this woman that was standing up and speaking at the event, and she was sharing her story. It was Rhonda Foster, who's also on the board of Women Against Gun Violence. She shared her story, and it was hard for me to even be in the room while she was sharing. I wanted to just run away and disappear. Just hearing everything that she had been through, it brought up so much for me. But something inside me was telling me to just stay. That was the least that I could do, was stay and be present to everything that she had been through. And afterwards, I went up to her and I just told her, you sharing that story meant so much to me. And I told her what happened to me, and I told her how I would never be brave enough to be able to share what happened to me, and it wasn't nearly as bad as what happened to you. I kept saying, I know what I went through isn't anything compared to losing a child to gun violence. At the time, I had 2 young children, 3 young children. I had just had a baby actually a couple of months before, and I just couldn't imagine going through what she went through. I knew that she was a survivor, but she looked at me and she said, well, we actually have an event coming up, a Women Against Gun Violence event coming up, and we're looking for a survivor to speak. Would you be interested? And I said, well, I'm not a survivor. You're obviously looking for somebody else. I haven't done anything. I wasn't heroic. I didn't, save anyone's life. And I haven't participated in any kind of activism since then. All I did was not die. That's all I felt like I had accomplished. And she said, no, you are a survivor. You are a survivor, and we would love for you to share your story. And I said, well, I guess I can, but I was confident that she was going to go back to the board and tell them, look, I found this person, and she was going to describe me, and everyone would be like, no, we don't want to hear her speak. We want somebody real, like somebody who's actually made a difference in the world. But she never came back to me and told me that she didn't want me. So I showed up, and I decided in that moment that instead of just sharing what I usually shared when people asked about my experience was, this happened, this happened, this happened, and now everything's fine. I decided to share the truth. And I shared what happened that night, how I felt as it was happening, and all of the pain and fear I had been living with since then. The fear of my children not surviving, the fear of going in the car and going to work and going to the grocery store, the fear that came up during every single mass shooting since then. And I poured my heart out on that stage. I was literally shaking. My whole body was shaking. It was my first time I had ever said all of that out loud to an audience of maybe 300 strangers. And when I was done, I climbed off the stage and I looked up, and I was expecting everybody in the room to just kind of think, wow, she's just having a hard time. She needs to get over it, you know? But what I got instead was a room of people standing up and clapping and celebrating me and my experience and acknowledging everything that I had been through. And I just completely broke down. Rhonda's husband caught me and held me. And it was like a decade's worth of emotions that I just let out. And that was, for me, the beginning of my healing, the beginning of my recovery.
I find it fascinating that it took that for you to allow yourself to call yourself a survivor.
Yeah, I needed permission. First of all, nobody had even brought that word up to me before. I did my best to separate myself from activism because it was too emotional for me. It was too hard. I felt so angry. I was so overwhelmed. And every time I even had a conversation, I would just lash out and break down. So I wasn't involved in any kind of gun violence prevention activism. And I wasn't in a world where people would call each other survivors. You know, when I got back to campus, one of my best friends had lost her sister to gun violence when she was younger. So I felt like she understood what I had been going through. One of my other friends had been shot before. He was involved in a gang and had been shot before. And that year, one of my other friends lost her brother to gun violence at Cal State Northridge. He was shot as just a college student. And we all had gone through these experiences, but none of us had labels for them. None of us knew how to work through them. All we knew was to just be there for and with each other and help each other kind of survive. So the idea of calling myself a survivor never even occurred to me. And the fact that the man who I never knew died next to me and I watched him die, I felt so much guilt even having that title. Even when Rhonda called me a survivor, all I could think of was him. So what are we going to call him? If I get this glorious title that makes it sound like I accomplished something magnificent, what happens to the people that we lose? And that, to me, it weighed so heavily on me that owning that title was really hard. But once I finally did, it gave me permission for compassion. It gave me an opportunity to almost see my own experience for what it really was. Instead of hating myself for surviving, I was able to look at that experience and realize what a devastating experience it really was for me, all of the things that I lost in that moment, and also find resilience in myself, you know, get community and have that community support and uplift me, and recognize that just because this one thing happened in my life doesn't mean that my dreams are completely lost, even though I lost sight of them for so long. So that was 4 years ago when I first met Rhonda, and I've been spending the past 4 years just facing every single fear in my path and recreating that dream life that I thought was lost, 14 years ago.
Wow. I'm going to ask you a question. There's a word that you invented. And
Yes.
it's called celebration. Now, I could give my interpretation, but we don't have a lot of time. Tell me about that.
Failibration is one of my favorite words, and I'll tell you why I invented it, which not many people know. So every Friday on my Instagram, I do Failibration Friday, and it's to encourage myself and my followers to accept and embrace failure as a stepping stone on our way to success. Because if I'm not failing, then I'm not going big enough. I'm not trying hard enough. I'm not stretching myself and growing. And every time that I fail, I learn something. Every time that I fail, it means that I went for something really important and big. And maybe I didn't get it this time, but I am one step closer to getting it. The reason that I invented this word is because when I was, during those 10 years that I was struggling and didn't really talk about it or open up to anyone about it, I tried. There were moments that I tried. There were times where I tried to go to a counselor maybe 7 or 8 times during that time period. And every time I went, I had negative experiences. Each of those times that I tried, any kind of method, I tried different kinds of therapy, I thought that it was a failure, and I thought that just meant stop trying, give up, it's not possible. But the truth is, all it meant is there's a different path for you and you're going to find it. So celebrating is just celebrating every step along the journey until you get that big celebration, until you reach whatever goal it is that you're going for right now, and then you can set another one and celebrate every step of the way till you get there. Celebrate the failures too sometimes. Cry it out, dance it out, commiserate, vent if you need to. Celebrate the fact that you tried and you're one step closer to whatever goal you want to achieve. That's why I celebrate. And I love celebrating because it reminds me to take those risks. It makes it exciting to take those risks instead of terrifying.
Absolutely. And it also, when you put it that way, to me, it also makes it so that you really stay on your own path and you accept what your path is. You might not have thought it looked like that, but here it is.
Absolutely. There are 2 things that I feel like are the most important. One of them is celebrating, so that's huge for me. And the other thing is to recognize fear as the border of the world I know. It's not a warning to run away. I used to treat it like anything you're scared of, run, hide, do whatever you need to do to get away from that thing. Now I recognize it as, if this is the world that I know inside this little circle, this is fear. And the second I face those fears, whatever fear it might be, big, small, whatever it might be, my world is just expanding. Every time I face a fear, my world expands and it becomes bigger and better than it's ever been before. So those 2 things, while I'm simplifying it a lot, those have been the foundation for not just my recovery, but me building a life where I'm truly happy and I'm able to dance and run and play soccer when I used to walk with a cane, when I used to hide from everything. I can be a role model for my children to face their own fears instead of teaching them to hide and run and be scared of the world.
We have about a minute left, and I just want to ask you what advice you might give to any trauma survivors that are out there.
One of the biggest things for trauma survivors to know is that if you have a little voice inside of you that's telling you that you aren't a survivor, that your experience isn't as bad as somebody else's, that you should suck it up and move on, that you should be over this by now, that is completely normal. And it's also something that we all feel because of survivor's guilt. You are a survivor. I've had survivors come out to me who have had all kinds of different experiences, whether it's that they were at a shooting when it took place, but they weren't shot themselves, or whether they had a family member who was shot or who was killed. It's such a wide range of things. It can be somebody whose family member was the shooter. I've been in workshops where family members of mass shooters are there and feel immense guilt for even showing up. the truth is that we all feel that guilt at some point. And that's completely normal. And you can work through that guilt. But the first step is to just show up.
Thank you so much for being here. And that's it. Women Against Gun Violence Short Takes from start to finish in 15 minutes. I'm Jode Mann, your host for today. Please be sure to check us out at www.wagv.org.